It's a big week for Jay-Z. His Rock Nation is geared up to produce the most watched live performance of the year, the Super Bowl halftime show. And of course, he was there to cheer on his wife, who took home the coveted award of Album of the Year at this year's Grammys. So in light of all of that, he's also making a surprising move in his ongoing back and forth with Tony Buzbee. Now at this point, we all know who the Texas-based attorney is. You know, the same one who said that he had more than 100 accusers ready to file lawsuits.
For years, the industry moved like a machine built on illusion. People swore they understood its inner workings, swore they knew who pulled the strings, swore they could tell the difference between power and performance. But behind all the polished stages,
who intend to bring civil claims in civil court against Sean Diddy Combs, as well as claims against many other individuals and entities that we will name as defendants as we file these individual cases.
And of course, we know later that Jane Doe, who is being represented by the Texas attorney, filed a suit a couple weeks after this press conference accusing Diddy of raping her when she was just 13 years old. Then amended that complaint weeks later, adding Jay-Z, Sean Carter's name to that child rape lawsuit alongside Diddy. A female celebrity was also mentioned in that complaint as well. However, her identity has since remained a mystery. Since that happened, first, let me say both Sean Combs and Sean Carter have denied those accusations. Diddy's team said, quote, "In court, the truth will prevail, that Mr. Combs never sexually assaulted or trafficked anyone, man or woman, adult or minor." Meanwhile, Jay-Z made a scathing statement of denial, mainly targeting Tony Buzbee. He said in part, quote, "My lawyer received a blackmail attempt called a demand letter from a lawyer named Tony Buzbee. What he had calculated was the nature of these allegations and the public scrutiny would make me want to settle. No, sir, it had the opposite effect. It made me want to expose you for the fraud you are in a very public fashion. So no, I will not give you one red penny." Now that statement went on to call Tony Buzbee a deplorable human, a man with no valor, and an ambulance chaser in a cheap suit. Now, while Diddy sits in a jail cell awaiting trial, by the way, pleaded not guilty to those charges, denies all the accusations made in the various lawsuits, Jay-Z and Tony Buzbee have been going back and forth with lots of motions filed, complaints filed, and accusations flying on both ends. The Jane Doe alleging she was raped by Diddy and Jay-Z went on NBC, where they pointed out consistencies in her account of what happened, including that her father picked her up after the alleged rape. Her father later told NBC he didn't recall that. She claimed she spoke to a celebrity there, but that celeb wasn't even in New York at that time. And photos showed Diddy and Jay-Z at different locations than the Jane Doe described. Now, that interview happened in mid-December. By the end of that month, Jay-Z sued Buzbee for defamation and extortion. Jay-Z's legal team has also been pushing for the Jane Doe to not hide under anonymity. And of course, Jay-Z's lawyers have been trying to get his name off that child rape lawsuit or just have it dismissed altogether. Now, a judge ruled that she can't proceed anonymously for now, but scolded Jay-Z's attorneys for their combative motions and inflammatory language used against Tony Buzbee. Then in January, a legal petition was filed by a Texas man who is represented by Tony Buzbee, who also accused Jay-Z's lawyers of bribing people to sue Buzbee and his law firm. So a lot's happened. Now, in a surprising move, Jay-Z's lawyer Alex Spiro is seemingly softening up on Buzbee. In a letter to Judge Annalisa Torres, the same one who previously scolded him, Spiro wrote, quote, "Dear Judge Torres, we write on behalf of defendant Sean Carter to respectfully request that Mr. Carter's motion for sanctions pursuant to Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 11 be withdrawn at this time without prejudice. We have discussed this matter with counsel for plaintiff who consents to this submission and agrees the withdrawal is without prejudice." And that motion was terminated. So what does it mean? Well, last month, Jay-Z's lawyer asked the court to impose sanctions against Buzbee for allegedly failing to do a reasonable investigation before filing the rape allegations against him. Jay-Z's lawyer even pointed out that Buzbee admitted to not even meeting Jane Doe before he signed off on her complaint. But Buzbee maintains the case was appropriately vetted. So while the move from Jay-Z's lawyers was surprising, it might also be a part of their strategy. At this time, neither Jay-Z, his legal team, or Tony Buzbee have publicly responded to this surprising move. But it's likely not the end of this ongoing legal saga, and we could hear more very soon. Let's unpack this further with attorney and litigator Rich Schoenstein. Rich, always great to see you. What's your reaction to this move done by Jay-Z's lawyer, Alex?
Behind all the parties and deals and photo ops, something darker was building, something so deeply rooted that most people assumed it was untouchable. For a long time, the empire that dominated the scene was treated like the final word. It didn't get questioned. It didn't get challenged. It didn't get examined. It simply existed, massive and intimidating, casting a shadow over everyone who stepped too close. But then the silence cracked. It didn't crack because some outsider threw a rumor into the wind. It didn't crack because a journalist dug too deeply. It cracked because someone who had been there from the beginning, someone who had climbed the inner walls of that machine, finally decided he had carried the truth long enough. And the second he started speaking, it wasn't just the empire that felt the shockwave, the entire landscape did. It felt like watching a monument collapse in slow motion while everyone stood there unable to pretend anymore. He didn't shout, he didn't curse, he didn't accuse with rage. He spoke like someone who had finally run out of patience with pretending. Every sentence he
Alex Spiro, are you surprised that he asked the judge to drop the motion for sanctioning Tony Busby?
Well, I'm a little bit surprised because, asking for sanctions is a pretty aggressive move. And so to turn around and withdraw that motion is a notable retreat from that move. So I wasn't expecting it. And the question is, why did they do it? And I would assume that's what we're going to talk about.
Definitely. And I, also want to ask, this letter said they want to withdraw it without prejudice. Why is that part important?
Well, without prejudice just means they could bring it again. So you can either withdraw a motion with prejudice, which means it's resolved and we can't bring it again, or without prejudice, which means the court doesn't have to deal with this now, but we're not waiving our rights. We're going to save the right to bring the motion again at a later time.
And, as you just mentioned before, I guess we're going to get into, why was this move even done in the first place? Now, Jay-Z's lawyer was previously scolded by that same judge for using inflammatory language against Tony Busby. But do you think that this is a part of a new strategy not to be harsh on the Jane Doe lawyer, instead hope to just get this suit dismissed instead?
Possibly. So that first thing you mentioned about the judge's reaction, I have three theories about why this was withdrawn. And the first one is exactly what you said. The judge has already indicated on the record that she's not thrilled with the way the attorneys are going at each other in this. And no judge is. No judge wants to make a case about conflict between the lawyers. Lawyers end up skirmishing all the time. They don't like each other all the time. They accuse each other of bad stuff all the time. And no judge wants the case to be about that. The judge wants the case to be about the merits, about the claims, about the parties, not about the lawyers. So she dressed down the lawyers at one point about this kind of activity, and it's possible that they have withdrawn the motion because they just don't think the judge is going to really consider it, given her predisposition. That's one possibility.
And what's your other possibility?
Well, I have two other possibilities, and there could be a mix of the three. The second possibility that occurred to me is, for some reason, the people who brought the motion, and that's the Quinn Emanuel firm, no longer think the motion is that strong. It's possible they've evaluated things. It's possible, they were claiming that the plaintiffs didn't vet the claims enough and made representations in the complaint that could not have been true. And maybe with further analysis, they've come to a view that the allegations in the complaint are not so demonstrably false that you could prevail on a motion for sanctions. Remember, a motion for sanctions is really hard to win on. I mean, they're very infrequently granted, especially in a contentious case like this. So I wouldn't have expected it to be granted anyway. So the second possibility is that Quinn Emanuel just decided it's not the best motion. It's not our best. We have a separate motion to dismiss the complaint against our client. That's the motion that we want to see through. That's the motion we want the judge to focus on. We want her to focus on the merits and dismiss the claims against our client. We don't care about the sanctions stuff. We're going to get it go.
Delivered cut straight to the bone, exposing things people whispered about behind closed doors but never dared to say publicly. As he talked, the illusion disintegrated piece by piece. The empire that once looked invincible suddenly looked fragile, like it had always been held together by silence instead of strength. He described a world no one wanted to believe was real, a world where power wasn't earned, it was enforced, where loyalty wasn't mutual, it was demanded, where success wasn't celebrated, it was weaponized. He painted a picture of an environment where nothing was ever what it seemed, where promises came with invisible chains, where opportunities were traps dressed up as gifts, where every handshake felt like a contract you didn't remember signing. He talked about being brought into rooms that shifted the temperature the moment the door shut, rooms where people smiled too wide, watched too closely, spoke too softly, rooms where the energy felt heavy, Like something was off, but nobody dared to acknowledge it.
And my third theory, which I have no basis for other than sheer speculation, I want to say that up front, is that there's some kind of deal here between the lawyers. The lawyers have accused each other, right? Busby's accused Quinn Emanuel of going after his clients and trying to get them to bring malpractice cases. Quinn Emanuel's gone after Busby and accused him of trying to drum up clients to bring claims against Combs and against Jay-Z. And maybe the attorneys have reached some sort of understanding about the ground rules. Maybe not, but maybe they have, and letting this motion go is part of that understanding. That would be my third possible reason.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned that it's speculation, but I think by you kind of explaining that, I feel like that might also be very plausible. I want to go back to what you said during kind of your second explanation, where, I'm sure Jay-Z from his side, he probably wants this lawsuit just to be, or this complaint to be dismissed, or not even amended in the first place, made in the first place. Obviously, nothing goes away in the blink of an eye, excuse me. But in your opinion, watching all of this legal back and forth that's been unfolding these past few months, do you think there is enough to dismiss, or do you think at a point this will even get litigated?
I think it's going to get litigated. If I had to guess, I haven't really studied the complaint against the motion to dismiss, so I don't have a advanced opinion about it. But my reaction to it is that the complaint accuses him of some very bad stuff, and that ought to be enough to move the case forward. That's my guess. Now, remember, at the outset of these litigations, we go through kind of a honing phase where the dispute is sort of narrowed down to certain parties and certain claims. And sometimes the motion to dismiss doesn't get rid of the case entirely, but it gets rid of some of the claims or it gets rid of some of the parties. I see today, by way of example, there's a brand new filing dismissing defendant Bad Boy Records LLC. There were separate claims against that company, and I don't know where all these companies fit in the pantheon of Bad Boy Records, but that company has been dismissed voluntarily from the action. And you'll see that kind of thing at the beginning of civil litigation. The parties and the claims have to be sorted out, and then the case can proceed with discovery.
And we do want to mention to our viewers there that even though Bad Boy Records was dismissed off that complaint, Sean Carter and Sean Combs are both still named there. I also want to talk to you, Rich, about a point that Jay-Z's lawyer made previously, and that was that Tony Busby never even met with this Jane Doe, despite saying in that press conference back in October that his firm vetted all of the claims. What are your thoughts on that, given that Busby is standing behind Jane Doe and the allegations that she made?
Yeah, well, so Busby, or certainly somebody from Busby's office, should be meeting with these plaintiffs before bringing claims. I mean, you should always meet with your client before you go charging into court with a claim, but all the more so when they're salacious, provocative, inflammatory claims like the ones in this case. You do have an obligation to make sure there's a good faith basis for proceeding with the claims. You have to make sure there aren't any red flags that would indicate the claim is false or being concocted, just to extort the parties. You have to do some due diligence. And
he talked about nights where he walked out feeling drained, second-guessing himself, wondering why something deep inside him felt wrong even though everyone around him acted like everything was normal. He said those nights piled up until they felt like a weight pressing against his shoulders, squeezing the truth out of him whether he wanted it or not. He explained that inside that empire, everything had a purpose, even the things that seemed harmless. Certain people were always positioned at certain places. Certain conversations happened at certain times. Certain invitations weren't really invitations, they were tests. Tests of loyalty, tests of obedience, tests of whether he was willing to bend the way they wanted him to bend. And the more he succeeded, the more the empire tightened its grip, convinced that he would never dare question it. But the mistake they made was believing silence equals allegiance. They thought the quiet meant comfort. They thought compliance meant agreement. They thought he was under their control. What they didn't realize was that he was slowly waking up, slowly connecting the dots, slowly recognizing that the empire wasn't protecting him.
Like, if a child asks you for something and you're trying to like teach them a lesson, you say, no, not right now. Go be good for a little while, then come back and ask me again. That is almost exactly what Judge Annalisa Torres did here. She wanted to send a message directly to Alex Spiro, who is obviously one of the most prolific attorneys in the country right now. I've known him for 20 years. He started as a DA in Manhattan. I knew him as a DA in Manhattan. I had cases against him as a DA in Manhattan. And he's gone on to do incredible things. But he has a very specific style. And there's a lot of people who don't like that style. And Judge Torres is one of them. He's now twice kind of taken the reins and tried to take control of the narrative of cases by putting on sort of these preemptive press conferences. He did it with Mayor Adams, and he did it now with Jay-Z, where he goes to the press and essentially puts on a PowerPoint and says, hey, this is why I think this case is garbage. This is all the inconsistencies. This is where this case fails. But it's obviously from his point of view. And so the judge doesn't like that. The other side of that, especially for me as a defense attorney, is, well, that's what the DAs do every time they make a big arrest. That's what the federal prosecutors do every time they make a big arrest. They go in front of the camera and they put on this sort of dog and pony show press conference to like tell the nation why this is such a just arrest, why this is such a just prosecution, and to try to get public opinion behind them as they move forward in the case. It's really Alex Spiro doing the exact opposite thing to help his client, but the judge really didn't like it. And so all of that is to say that this ruling to me is specifically directed at Alex Spiro, saying, I don't like what you're doing. I don't like all the motions you're filing. I don't like how you're going about handling this case. And if you continue to do it, you're not the only one who's got some tricks up their sleeve. I can also do things to make this process more difficult.
Yeah, the second half of this motion was kind of crazy. She really called him out. I thought it was really interesting to go through the motion and read it. And it sounds like it was a major tactic on his side to do these press conferences, as you said, file these motions. So if he doesn't stop doing that and just continues bombarding her with all of these motions, what sort of response could the judge have?
If I'm being honest, not much. The federal court system has a lot of power, and the judges there have a lot of power, and they demand a level of respect that sometimes judges in state court don't demand. And I say respect, actually, it's more formality. They demand a formality in the process. And so they can do these things and they can make your life very difficult, but they don't have a lot of leverage, especially over someone like Alex Spiro, who works at a private firm. The judges can't stop him from continuing to bring in a stream of business. And the reality is that even though this victim's name has been continued to be made anonymous for the public for now, that just cannot continue. Because what the judge is doing currently is balancing the public's need for information and the defense's need for information so they can prepare for trial versus the effect that this will have on the alleged victim and her psyche. And obviously the world knows that as soon as her name is revealed, everyone is going to come down on her, from the media to his attorneys to the social media. You're going to get it from all sides. And so she's doing this victim, the alleged victim, a favor right now by keeping her anonymous, but it's just not practical. So if he keeps doing this, getting back to your question, if he keeps filing these motions, if he keeps making the process difficult, she could sanction him, but she would really have to prove that his motions were not just frivolous, but almost malicious. But ultimately, she's going to have to sign off on revealing the identity of this alleged victim. And there's nothing that's going to stop that from happening if this case continues to move forward.
Let's talk a bit more about Jane Doe and her identity yet to be revealed, because as of right now, we just have Jane Doe. But if we refer back to previous...
It was consuming him. He described the moment everything shifted as a quiet one. No yelling, no confrontation, just clarity. The kind of clarity that doesn't happen overnight but hits you all at once when you recognize a pattern for what it really is. He realized he wasn't being guided, he was being used. Not celebrated, displayed. Not supported, managed. He started seeing the small things he once ignored, the lingering looks, the forced closeness, the unspoken expectations, the way people around the empire moved like they were walking on glass. And the more he saw, the less he could pretend. Leaving wasn't easy. He didn't walk out boldly. He didn't announce his departure. He slipped away quietly, carefully, like someone escaping a place that didn't allow exits. He said if he had tried to leave loudly, the system would have tightened around him until there was no escape at all. So he left in silence. carrying the memories like scars he never got to talk about. But the empire didn't crumble when he left. It crumbled when he
cases. There was another Jane Doe case. We just recently learned her name, Anna Kane. It came out, the judge ruled. So do you think in this case, the judge could maybe reference that other one and say, okay, time's running out. We got to know your name. It's just the way it's got to go.
Yeah, this is a major news story because it's related to Jay-Z, because it's related to Diddy, and even because the attorneys, Tony Busby and Alex Spiro involved. Those are names that are big names right now. And so it gets attention, but this isn't an unusual thing. There are plenty of cases that all of us in the criminal justice world have had where we want to know a victim's name. We want to know more information on an undercover cop. We want to know an alleged victim of sexual assault so we can get an investigator, so we can do our research, so we can do all these things. And even without the bright lights of Hollywood and the media and scrutiny of social media, judges still routinely rule in favor of protecting someone's identity in this situation. So I don't think this is sort of outside the box where no other judge or judicial review committee is going to look at Annalisa Torres' decision and say, wow, this is so unreasonable. This is going to get overturned immediately. This is outrageous. You're not hearing any of that. In fact, if you look at some of these articles, they'll even say, this is kind of a routine thing. But the reality is, like the case you just referenced, at some point, it is impossible to prepare. It is impossible to confront your accuser, which you have a constitutional right to do, unless you have their identity, unless you can do some real meaningful work. And getting the name of the accuser the day before trial or a week before trial, which some of us have had happen, is mostly a thing of the past now, because appeals courts have been pretty clear that that is a massive prejudice to be able to put on a reasonable and meaningful defense for your client.
And this is something that Judge Torres referenced specifically in her motion. She basically said, I will keep this quiet. Your name will be Jane Doe for now, but I reserve the right to change my mind. And according to what you're saying, it sounds like she might. What could a timetable look like for that, for us to know Jane Doe's true identity?
It's hard to say. I mean, part of what the judge was angry about was Alex Spiro's constant barrage of letters, which she found combative, full of inflammatory language. But the heart of those letters was essentially, let's move this along. Let's do this as fast as possible. So even if she's trying to stop him from doing that, I don't think there's going to be a shift in strategy on trying to move this case forward as fast as possible. They want this case resolved and done as fast as possible. Now, sometimes that's just puffery, but we'll see as this case goes on. If you see a continuance of Mr. Spiro's sort of pursuing getting this to trial quickly, then that's going to shorten up the timeline. A lot of times attorneys ask for more time to review discovery, to prepare, to find witnesses. But in this case, it sounds like they want to push this as fast as possible. So the closer we get to a hearing or a trial that has some sort of meaningful result attached to it, then the judge will be forced to turn over not turn over. The judge will be forced to reverse her decision and make the name public.
Something we have to remember from this specific Jane Doe lawsuit is it gave us the bombshell revelation of Jay-Z's involvement. So when it was first filed, he was simply Celebrity A, and there's a Celebrity B, but we didn't know who he was. Now we know it's Jay-Z. It's been amended to actually have his name in there, Sean Carter. But there's still Celebrity B, a female celeb. We don't know who she is. Do you think her identity could be revealed?
That's going to be probably up to Tony Busby, the attorney for the plaintiff. Clearly, they're trying to use these sort of Celebrity A pseudonyms.
Talked. People started wondering how deep the corruption went. How many people knew? How many stayed silent? How many helped bury things? And as they wondered, the empire struggled. Publicists couldn't spin fast enough. Lawyers couldn't shield them fast enough. The public couldn't unsee what it saw. The collapse wasn't just legal, it was reputational, emotional, cultural. Because once he broke the silence, the truth didn't just spill out, it poured out like a flood that had been waiting behind a cracking dam. He explained how the empire was built on things nobody wanted to acknowledge. Not creativity, not mentorship, not innovation, but dominance, control, fear. The empire didn't thrive because people trusted it. It thrived because people were terrified of it, afraid of what would happen if they spoke, afraid of being erased, afraid of being cut off from opportunities that were dangled like bait. As he spoke, the industry's reaction shifted from disbelief to panic, because he wasn't speculating, he was confirming. He wasn't gossiping, he was exposing. He wasn't exaggerating, he was recounting.
As leverage. And you can see what happened when they put Sean Carter in there. I think it was first filed in October, and then they put him in only a few weeks ago on December 8th. And look what we're doing now. We're talking about it. It's in the news. It kind of had died down, the specific allegations. It was more just sort of an umbrella story about Diddy and what his parties meant and sort of what they mean right now in the legal world and in the world of media. But now that they've added Jay-Z's name specifically to it, it's obviously getting a whole new wave of attention and more focused attention on this victim. So I think it's going to be tied to the media cycle, if I had to guess, and how these rulings continue. And they have this celebrity name that is sort of waiting to take over the headlines when they choose to release it. So I think it will be added, but it's going to be a strategic time.
What about additional lawsuits? Because Tony Busby, the name you've been mentioning a lot, has said, he said there were thousands of allegations, but he says he's going to file more than 100 civil lawsuits. So we obviously know that P. Diddy is going to be involved in this, but could Jay-Z, could other celebrities that have yet to be named?
Yeah, of course. Just put a dartboard up, put any celebrity you want on there and just throw a dart. And any one of them could be involved. How many people have you heard named that were at these parties? Like, these were synonymous. When you said party, Hollywood party in the early 2000s, Diddy was synonymous with that. There's a sketch you can find online of the opening scene to the VMAs, right? The MTV Video Music Awards. The whole point of the sketch is that everyone was at a Diddy party. The whole thing is surrounded about glorifying Diddy's parties. And so everyone who was hot during that time period was at one of these parties. Jay-Z, LeBron James, Ashton Kutcher. The list is endless of celebrities who were there. But obviously being there has no association with this type of wrongdoing. This is so beyond the pale of attending a party. And so, yeah, you could see anybody's name, but please keep in mind that just attending a party does not mean you were involved in some litany of sexual assaults on a minor or an adult. So I wonder, as this goes on, I think we're going to start seeing more stories on both sides. You just saw from Blake Lively, which is a completely separate story, but you can see from her and what's come about her recently that if you want to do a smear campaign against someone, there are firms out there. That's their whole job. And I think what we're learning right now is it's not that difficult. You get a few people and a few key pieces, and you can really turn the tide of public opinion. So now we're also starting to see stories about Tony Busby. And did he do some wrongdoing? And he's getting sued for things. I have no clue if he's ever done anything wrong in his life. I don't know the man, and I don't know the stories well enough to comment on whether or not what he did is right or wrong, or if there's any truth to it. But, I think a cautionary tale here is Michael Avenatti, who's Stormy Daniels' attorney, right? We all remember that guy shot to fame so fast, and everyone loved him because they could not wait to take down Trump with this porn star who he had paid off. But people didn't do their research. And then all of a sudden, this guy, Michael Avenatti, who was the hottest attorney in the country, who was on the way to like a political career and fame and fortune, where is he now? He's in federal prison because it also turned out he had blackmailed the executives of Nike for trying to do a smear campaign against them. So we're just at the beginning stages of the power of the media and people with malicious intent can do. And I think we're going to see a really ugly play out here.
Michael Avenatti, I haven't heard that name or thought about him in a...
And his version of events lined up almost perfectly with years of strange stories, suspicious disappearances, abrupt shifts in loyalty, and unexplained breakdowns from people who had once been deeply connected to the empire. He talked about moments he never processed until now, moments where he felt watched, moments where he felt pressured into situations that didn't feel right, moments where he realized he wasn't being included, he was being assessed, evaluated, measured. He talked about people he once admired who looked broken behind their smiles, people who went along with everything the empire demanded because they didn't know how to survive without it, people who whispered their truths only in the shadows, terrified of what would happen if the wrong ears caught their confessions. Now, everything is shifting. The empire that once stood unshaken is trembling. The image carefully polished for decades is cracking. The people who once protected the system are distancing themselves, and those who once stayed silent are starting to reconsider whether silence is still worth it. What makes his revelation so devastating isn't just the content, it's the credibility. He wasn't an outsider with an agenda. He wasn't someone looking to settle a score. He was someone who lived the experience firsthand, someone who saw the empire from the inside, someone who once believed in it before he realized what it really was. He admitted that there are things he still can't talk about, things too deep, too twisted, too dangerous to expose right away. But even the parts he did share were enough to shake the foundation of everything people thought they understood. Enough to reveal that the empire's power didn't come from talent or influence but from fear and manipulation. Enough to force the world to look at the legacy through a different lens. And now the biggest question is, who speaks next? Because once one person cracks the silence, others start feeling brave enough to step forward. And once enough voices join in, the truth becomes impossible to bury. The empire can't survive off fear forever. Eventually, the truth outruns the threats. Eventually, the victims outnumber the enforcers. And eventually, the illusion collapses under the weight of everything it tried to hide. This is that moment. This is the shift. This is the point where the empire built on shadows finally gets dragged into the light. And once the truth is out, nothing can go back to the way it was.